Hello and welcome to Author Academia, and today we will be doing a review of Christopher Paolini's The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm. This will be a spoiler-free review. Fans of Christopher Paolini's Inheritance Cycle have long awaited more tales from Alagaësia. The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm is a somewhat brief but refreshing return. The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm is an anthology which takes place after the events of the Inheritance Cycle, so if you're new to the tetralogy, I would highly recommend reading through the rest of Christopher Paolini's Inheritance Cycle first. While for the most part all of the short stories are capable of being enjoyed by new readers, I can pretty much guarantee you will appreciate The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm more if you have a broader background to the world of Alagaësia. Also, you'll spoil the ending of the Inheritance Cycle for yourself, which would be a bit of a bummer. Just as a warning for this review, I will assume you have already read the Inheritance Cycle. The books have been out for 8 years now, so any spoilers from that are fair game. Also, The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm is not a 1,000-page epic. As stated before, it's an anthology with one main narrative that branches out into 3 distinct tales, as the title might suggest. Now that we know what we're dealing with, on to the review. Our overarching narrative hails with some familiar faces, Eragon and Saphira, who are a great character synergy as always. The duo have been tasked with the matters of reviving the Riders and have settled down in a rather peaceful spot in the eastern reaches. I think Paolini has stayed true to the personality of Eragon and Saphira, and it's wonderful to see these characters post-inheritance as wise and humble, but also retain some of the motivation and quirks that make them lovable in the first place. I found their umbrella story to be a fitting catalyst for this anthology, but also an intriguing bit of reading, as we now get to see a more mature and, dare I say, wise Eragon and Saphira, who struggle to adjust with a more laid-back and peaceful lifestyle. The first story, The Fork, is lighthearted, wholesome, and humorous. Of the 3 stories to serve as an appetizer to readers, I am quite confident in saying The Fork is the best start. I quite like the character we follow through the story, a young girl named Essie. Essie suffers from a fairly arbitrary problem compared to what we're used to and some of the darker tales of Alagaësia, but from her naive perspective it seems large and world-ending, and this is what I love and appreciate about younger characters, that the trials and tribulations of the world can differ in such a significant way than those that are more mature, and that window in which they understand and interact with the world is just so limited, which allows for a great use of dramatic irony. The Fork does have a prominent moral to it, which might bother the reader a little since it does stick out, but the lesson itself is an interesting juxtaposition to other elements to which you may catch on if you read yourself, and I think when taking this into account, the moral is an intelligent and thought-provoking addition. Paolini's prose is smooth and simple, allowing for easy reading, but without sacrificing a vividness the reader can behold in their mind's eye. If there was a flaw for The Fork, it might be that the story doesn't take itself very seriously and seems superficial, which may be at times. But along with a little superficiality is a lot of nuance that I will discuss in the spoiler section. If I had to sum up The Fork in 3 words, I would say it's quite charming. It's been a while, but one of my favorite parts of the Inheritance Cycle itself was when I think Eragon and Saphira flew as high together as they could go, assisted by magic, and attempted to break through the atmosphere. Not that I think Paolini's working on space dragons for his new sci-fi book or anything, but this added a new element of mystery and possibility for me as a reader, this kind of whole new wonder about the land of Alagaësia and what may exist beyond the confines of the Earth-like world. Angela Paolini's writing in the second short story, The Witch, evoked these same feelings for me. Angela's writing is different from Christopher's, but I think this is in no way a bad thing. The nature of The Witch being what it is, Angela Paolini has chosen to write her story in first person, letting us as the reader experience the raw thoughts and experiences Angela the herbalist has. I mean, when it comes to a mysterious character, nothing is more intriguing than being teleported into their head and snooping around for secrets. Angela has been to me this character whose wit is as sharp as her tongue, perhaps a bit full of herself and sassy, but ultimately well-meaning, and through first-person perspective, I think these attributes really shine through. Now, this is not to say Angela's writing itself is complex. It is streamlined in much the same way Christopher's has been, but the magnitude of some of the existential ideas being expressed from such simple language are a theory crafter's dream come true, or perhaps maybe a nightmare to some. The way Angela writes with large elements of this kind of vagueness and uncertainty, personally, I think that's the beauty of it. The nature and existence of Angela, the character, has always been a bit mysterious and oracle-like, and so for The Witch to be written this way, I don't think it's a transgression. However, written as it is, with the breaks in time and space it has, I do think parts of The Witch could potentially confuse some readers, which might lessen their enjoyment. Also, I want to add, as one might expect, the story taken as itself here is very fragmented with a severe cut to plot in favor for a boon in lore. I do certainly think a second reading is in order for myself so I can contemplate some of the meanings and metaphors, but regardless, The Witch does tie into the inheritance cycle in a way I think readers will appreciate, and I think Angela is able to write Angela in a way that stays true to her character and leaves us asking twice as many questions as she answers, as is the nature of fortune tellers, I suppose. The final story, The Worm, is certainly the longest and strongest of the three stories, and I think it ties up the anthology quite nicely. Once again, The Worm has this metaphorical ambiance that might come off strongly to some, but to me personally, how it is woven into the bleakness and helplessness of the narrative makes it tight in a pervasive sense of resentment and despair. The plot is earnest and well written. The main character is relatable and real. To be frank, looking back, The Worm feels more akin at times to horror than fantasy, and maybe that's why I love it so much. The Worm is a serious, dark, and gritty tale, which I think Paolini fans will appreciate immensely, even if it happens to be less of a throwback and more of a damn good story. Eragon's overarching story is what concludes The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm off, and if I'm not mistaken, I think Volume 1 suggests we may see more in the future. When looking at a piece of literature written as a sequel or an expansion, there are a couple things that I like to look for: expansion of lore, respect for the canon, character development, and a narrative that can stand up by itself even if given a platform by other works. I think The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm checks all of these boxes and is a fine addition. As for rating, if you're a past fan of Eragon, I think you'll appreciate this anthology, as it is very respectful of what the inheritance cycle was and still is, and I would recommend you buy it for a welcome and long overdue visit to Alagaësia. As for you newcomers, I think you'll have fun too, but I think you're gonna miss out. Thanks for watching. If you're interested, I should have a spoilers discussion vid up very soon. Feel free to swing by there and we can talk some inheritance.